When a cosmic hero isn't enough to save us, we at least can rest assured because we have the Messiah to protect us in our darkest days. Stand up! Vanguard! Hey Cardfighters, welcome back to the final set review of V-BT08 Silverdust Blaze. We already looked at the cards for Oracle Think Tank Kagero as well as Dimension Police, so that means there is only one clan left that we need to talk about, and that is Link Joker. And of course, Link Joker brings in a new wave of support for not only the leaders, but of course Messiah. And Messiah is taking the front spotlight for this particular set as the main VR is the new version of Messiah, Alter Ego Messiah, aka the Grade 3 Messiah for the G era. So with the introduction out of the way, let's dive straight into the videos because there's a lot to talk about, and as per usual, Messiahs has a lot of interesting intricate combos between their cards, which we need to explain, to analyze, and to give a good example of what the power level is of these cards. But don't scoff at the leaders just yet, because the leaders has some really interesting toys to say at the very least. So as per usual, we start off with the reprints, and of course Link Joker, like all the other clans in this set, got 2 reprint critical triggers, which of course are just going to be 1 stars as they're just generic reprints. And on those 2 reprint triggers, they also got 3 new triggers, and the first one we're gonna take a look at is the new heal trigger, which is Juvenile Child of Virtual Particles, which also is going to be a 1 star because it's just a normal heal trigger and we cannot do anything fancy with 2 sets of heals. Now the second new trigger is of course a draw trigger, which is Milky Way Sharp Sword Guerg, and Guerg is going to be a 3-star card because it just adds more option to your trigger lineup, so it's pretty solid to add that to the roster. Then on top of that, we also got the new Sentinel critical trigger, which is of course Blink Messiah, and this is going to be a 5-star card because it's just a good solid option to add on to the roster for Link Joker, because it's a new type of Sentinel as well as a new type of critical. Now of course, just like all the other clans, they also got a new generic starter, which this time is Ionization Master Glue Bridge. And Glue Bridge is just gonna be a 1-star for me because although the artwork is pretty neat, and this is definitely my preferred artwork as for the starters for Link Joker, but it's just a generic starter, although it has the updated skill text. But just as I explained in all the other set reviews for this set, all the other starters are errata with this skill as well. Now, with that explained, let's talk about some generic support cards that can be utilized in all types of Link Joker decks. And the first one we're going to take a look at is this Grade 2 Evil Claw of Natural Laws, Dravel Claw. And Dravel Claw is an 8k Grade 2 with the following ability: auto when it intercepts or is placed on a Guardian Circle. If it's the 4th battle of this turn or more, draw a card. Yeah, this is going to be a 1-star for me because this is a really bad card. Why would you actually play this? You're dependent on your opponent's playstyle. So if they are a force deck that can only dish out 3 attacks, this card is literally a dead card that you cannot utilize, and even then, that means that you need to specifically time this card to be able to use the skill. And what do you get out of jumping through these hoops? A draw. Yeah, it's a free draw, but it's not worth it. Then another interesting Grade 2 is Vast Taurus Dunalunas, and Dunalunas has the following ability: continues a record circle. If there are a total of 2 or more face down cards in any fighter's bind zone or circles, this unit gets power plus 10k. So interesting enough, this works also during your opponent's turn, so it can be a 20k unit. And because it works with the bind zone as well, means it can work with the leaders and just generic Link Joker support as well. It's nice, but it's not amazing. And because of that, it's gonna be 2-star because yes, it's a 20k beater, but that's the only thing it does. It's still reliant on other cards. It still needs other cards to bind stuff or lock stuff to actually do anything. And also it does work with deleting of the Vanguard, but even then it still has the same issue that it's depending on other cards to actually get the 10k power buff. And that's not warranting enough for it to be actually getting a spot in your deck. Then from those Grade 2s, we go to a generic Grade 3, which is White Matter Jacked. And Jacked has the following abilities: auto and Vanguard the Record Circle. When placed, cost Counter Blast 1 and Soul Blast 1, and put a card from your drop zone on the Vanguard Circle as locked. So this is basically a +1 because you get one card from the drops into the field. Yes, it's locked, but that means next turn you're going to get value out of it because it's unlocked, so that's actually a card that you don't have to call from hand. Is it warranted for the counterblast Soul Blaze? Not really. It's quite heavy, but there are ways that you can abuse it to some extent, but it's not the greatest type of skill. But also has a second ability, which is continuous Rearguard Circle. During the battle it attacked, your opponent cannot normal call cards other than grade zeros. So this is basically the same guard restrict that we've seen on V series Silent Tom. But now it's on a grade 3. That's not really that great, and also its unplaceability is also not the best of value, so I can only give it a maximum of 2 stars. Probably even in a budget build, it's not that ideal, but it's at least something, and it also got the force marker to boot, so you get some value out of the card, but it's not great. Then the last generic support card that we got for Link Joker is of course the grade 3 Searcher, and we're gonna do another speed run of the second skill, but before that, of course, her name is Lady Battler of the White Dwarf, and her unique power skill is continuous effect at the Rearguard Circle. During your turn, if any face down card is in any fighter's bind zone or circle, this unit gets power plus 5k. This is nice because that means it's synergized with the leaders, as it counts the leader Vanguard. It's synergized with Messiah, as it counts the lock card. And it's synergized with any other bind zone card, because you can bind your opponent's cards face down, and it will also fulfill this condition. So this is actually pretty good 5k solid power buff and grade 3 searcher for any archetype. And that makes it a really good card. And then of course for the grade 3 skill, for anybody that isn't aware of it, it's of course auto effect at the Rearguard Circle. When placed from hand, look at the 5 cards from top of your deck, reveal the grade 3 from among them, put them in your hand, shuffle the deck, and if you put a card, discard a card from your hand. So simply the grade 3 searcher effect. Now of course it has some awkwardness to the Messiah gameplay, because you don't always have a lock card on the field, and it depends on your combo plays that you might or might not be able to attain the correct timing for the 5k power. But it doesn't dismiss the fact that this is a really good card for the overall archetype of Link Joker. So for that, it's definitely a 5-star card for me. Now, with those generic cards out of the way, let's jump straight into everybody's favorite archetype of card for Vanguard, Deletors. And we're gonna start off with this 6k grade 1 Deletor that is Stringent Deletor Irgirma. And Irgirma's ability is auto and Rearguard Circle. When any fighter searches a deck for a card by his or her card effects, that fighter Soul Blaze 1. He or she searches even if the soul has no cards. So basically this forces your opponent to waste resources if they want to search a card. This is a really interesting skill, and something that I've been advocating for the longest of time. Some way to be able to interact with your opponent's soul, because a lot of clans that just rely on soul, build up soul, are basically immune to any type of control aspect. So if they go live and can do their stuff infinitely, like Pale Moon and Dark Regulars. There is no counterplay to their massive soul buildup. This skill somewhat does that, but at the same time just missed the mark, and for that it can only be a 1 star. And the reason why that's the case is because this card specifically states that the fighters need to search the deck. So that means cards like the grade 3 searcher that check top 5 doesn't count, because you're not searching your deck, you're checking the top X cards of your deck, and most searchers now check top X cards for a card. That doesn't count as searching your deck, because a card specifically needs to state search your deck. So a good example is of course the new Columbard that searches the deck. So in that case, you're forced to Soul Blast if you want to activate Columbard. So those type of skills will force out Irgirma to actually activate. So interesting enough, that does contemplate Harry to some extent if they want to search out the dragon with Lore Pigeon Pop, if they want to search out from the deck. But that's definitely not enough to actually counterplay Harry. But if we get more cards like that that directly search out cards from the deck instead of the top X cards, then maybe this card might actually be good. But now that's definitely not the case, because barely any cards are actually doing that. Then next up we've got another grade 1 Deletor card, which is Higher Deletor of Baon. And Baon is very similar to its original GR counterpart, because its skills auto from drop zone. When your opponent's Vanguard is deleted, you may call this card to the Rearguard Circle. This is definitely a 3-star card for me, because this is basically a Rising Phoenix for the leaders. But the reason why Rising Phoenix at the time was a 5-star card and this is only a 3-star card is because this is way less versatile than Rising Phoenix, because it only works when your opponent's Vanguard is deleted. binding a rearguard is way easier and way more generic in Narukami to do than actually deleting the opponent's Vanguard. And also the timing is the window of opportunity is also very small, so there's no real way to actually use it as a multi-tech engine. This is basically to substitute for the minuses that you're going to make in deleters, especially with the new support that will force you to discard a couple of cards. So for that, it's only good enough as a 3-star card. Then another grade 1 deleter card that we have is Enduracing Deleter Zegrao. And Zegrao's ability is auto. When retired from the rearguard circle, bind 2 grade 0s from your drop zone face down and call this card to the rearguard circle as rest. So just like the grade 1 that we just talked about, Phase 1, this card can mitigate the losses of the minus that you need to do. And this basically synergizes with Given that force you to discard or retire a couple of cards to be able to restand your Vanguard. And of course, it calls it in rest, so that means you cannot multi-tag this way with Given or something like that, which is fair, but at least you don't minus that many cards in the field. So it's okay, it's not amazing, it's very limited in what it wants to do, so for that I will give it 2 stars because the amount of limitation is pretty high, and it's basically to just put a damper on the amount of minusings you might do in deleters. Then follow up, we go to a new grade 2 deleter, which is Strafe Deleter Gae. And Gae ability is auto Vanguard the rearguard circle. When an attack hits a Vanguard, cost counterblast 1 and discard a card from your hand, and when your opponent would normal ride during the next ride phase, he or she cannot ride unless a card is additionally discarded from his or her hand. So this is interesting, but not great. The interesting part is that you delete your opponent's Vanguard, so they want to ride a new Vanguard so they get their skills and also a higher base power, so it's very logical for them to do that. So if you delete them and you get this skill, that means they need to discard another card, so they go -2. But at the same time, you need to sacrifice a counterblast and you need to discard a card from your hand, which incidentally gives the entire control of this card to your opponent. They can decide if they, I don't mind discarding an extra card because I have way too much useless cards, and I will probably force my opponent to discard a card which they might not even want to discard, and also waste the counterblast which they probably want to use to keep me deleted for an extra turn. So that's the issue that I have with Gae. So for that I can only give it a 2-star rating. It's probably not going to be run. It's interesting to have this type of effect, but probably is not good enough to actually make the cut. Then speaking of interesting deleters cards, we've got this grade 3 Ditto Deleter Baon. And Baon's ability is auto Vanguard the rearguard circle. At the beginning of each turn's battle phase, choose one of your opponent's Vanguards and increase or decrease this unit's power to match that unit until the end of turn. Keep note that this card has 0 power. So basically, this card will always hit the Vanguard if it's the first attack, because you will copy your opponent's Vanguard power, so it will be 12k or 13k. But seeing as it's a deleter card and you put it in a deleter deck, then it will still remain 0 power as soon as your opponent's Vanguard is deleted. So yeah, it's not the most threatening attack that you could have. But what's interesting, however, on this card is that if you cannot delete your opponent's Vanguard and they have some special ability like Magicite or Blaster, you can still copy the power and you will always hit. So there's some consistency in that. But I think the more interesting aspect of this card lies in the defensive value, because you can have this as your Vanguard, and then every time you pass a turn to your opponent and they do their main phase shenanigans and they go into the battle phase, this card will copy the opponent's Vanguard power. So if you're up against a deck that stacks on force 1 markers on a Vanguard circle, then suddenly this card can become 33k at the start of the battle phase against your opponent. Against some decks that might be devastating because none of their rearguards will hit, or you can just put a 15k shield and it's like a no pass, or you can guard for 5ks on the rest of the attacks, and that's basically everything for shield value that you're going to lose that turn, and you can do that for multiple turns. So depending on what the matchups is and what the meta is, this can be an insane defensive 2 option, and in premium, it's a really odd card, because in most cases during the final turns your opponent's going to stride, so they're going to be at a minimum of 27k Vanguard power. So this will also be 27k during your opponent's turn. So depending on what type of multi-tech or the main mechanic they have, this card can be insane. Because a good example of this is that This card somewhat counters Gasteel. Yes, Gasteel gives the entire front row insane amount of powers, but it all happens during the main phase, or at least the main bulk of it happens during the main phase. So the moment they proceed to go into battle phase, this thing can suddenly spike up to 60 to 70k, so that makes guarding a Gasteel turn suddenly a lot easier. So it's a really interesting card, but where it's super strong in defensive options, it's probably really weak in offensive option because the thing is just 0 power and at the very least mimics the opponent's Vanguard power, so you could at least hit, but that's definitely not good. And in premium, that means you're gonna stride on top of a 0 base power, so your strides are just 15k. So you definitely are sacrificing stuff here. So depending on how good this card might be, and it might have a meta call or not, I'm willing to give this card a 3-star rating because there might actually be something with this card that people are overlooking and might suddenly shift the meta in some capability. It can all be speculation, but I think there is something with this card that people don't experiment with to actually try something here with. Now we have one more Deletor card, which is basically a good consistency card for Deletors, as we have another grade 3, which will replace the trial deck Deletor to some extent, as we have Screening Deletor Idoga, and its ability is Auto Vanguard Circle. When placed, cost counterblast 1, and discard a card from your hand, and delete your opponent's Vanguard. So it's a way cheaper Vanguard deletion, and that can also happen on your first grade 3 right target, so that's why it's definitely possible to replace the trial deck grade 3. But it also has a rearguard skill, which is Auto Rearguard Circle. When placed, costs Soul Blast 1, and your opponent cannot be released from delete during his or her next end phase. So it's Omega Delete. This is probably not really that important because your opponent's probably gonna rewrite next turn and the premium is probably gonna stride, so this doesn't mean anything in most cases. But it can have some interesting applications, and it's only a Soul Blast, so it's not that expensive, so depending on the scenario, it might actually give you more value than you actually expected. But overall, it's just a Deletor that's upgrades from the trial deck, and it's not really that something revolutionary with Deletor's deck, so I'll can give it a 3-star rating. I think that's fine enough for this card. And yeah, it's a nice tool upgrade for the leader deck, but the leader deck itself doesn't really look like an insane new engine that comes out of this set because it's going to be overshadowed by the next archetype, which we're going into right now. As the new upgraded archetype is of course Messiah, and we have their new VR boss monster, which is Alter Ego Messiah. And Alter Ego Messiah has 2 very powerful skills. His first one is Active Vanguard Circle. Once per turn, cost Soul Blast 1 and put a total of 2 cards with different card names from your drop zone onto your rearguard circle as locked. So this is actually a Soul Blast +2. And yes, and in this case it actually is a +2 because with this other skill you can unlock those cards so you can actually get immediate value during those turns. And depending on your playstyle, this can actually be even more effective because we of course have that new order card that allows you to unlock cards. So if you combine this skill with the order card, you could immediately unlock one of those 2 cards and attack before you do your shenanigans. So it's actually a really good skill, and because you call from the drop zone, that means you can keep reusing your cards and you're not really dependent on what's in your deck anymore. So you go less fast through your deck and you have more access to your pieces, which makes the deck a lot more consistent. But on top of that, it also has the ability, although in Vanguard Circle, when it attacks, choose any number of any player lock cards, unlock them, and all of those unlocked units gets power plus 10k until the end of turn. So where Harmonix Messiah allows you to draw most of your cards thanks to unlocking and you get some power to the front row, this gives all those units power and it sacrifices the draws. But at the same time, its first ability allows you to call from the drop zone so you don't have to call from hand. So it basically mitigates those differences between the cards. And of course, Alter Ego Messiah is a much faster card than Harmonix Messiah because it doesn't have the grade 3 and soul condition to activate its full potential. So overall, Alter Ego Messiah is a super aggressive card that is pretty consistent and allows you to do some really interesting plays. But before we're going to rate this card, let's talk about the new support card for Messiah, as that will give us a better picture for what Alter Ego will bring to the table. Now, first off, we're going to talk about the new grade 1, which is Bending Solid Hit Van Manen. And Van Manen's ability is Auto Rearguard Circle. When unlocked, draw a card. This ability may only be used by a card with the same card name once per turn. So this synergizes with Alter Ego Messiah. You can unlock it and you get to draw And it sadly is only once per turn, but then again, you cannot really chain a lot of these effects because you cannot keep unlocking, locking in standard Link Joker. So it's fine, but it means you cannot put 2 on the field and unlock them both. So this can be good to have more consistency in the mid game so you can draw the pieces that you need if you're missing those vital pieces. And overall, it's a pretty good card that you can run at certain copies. And I think this is going to be a tech option for certain Link Joker builds. And definitely not something you're going to run at a 4-off, maybe maximum 3-off. But it feels more like a 2-off kind of cards for the new Messiah strategy. So for that, I think it's a solid 4-star card, even though you might not run it at that many quantities because of the hard once per turn restriction. But getting that draw for free on top of what Messiah already provides is actually pretty solid because you can call this thing from the drop zone. So effectively you extend those pluses from Alter Ego Messiah. So actually that's pretty good. Then on top of that we also got a new grid 1, which is Manipulator of the Void, and her ability or its ability is Auto Vanguard the Record Circle. When it attacks or the attack it boosted hits a Vanguard, so that's a pretty good versatile on hit skill, cost, put a card from your hand onto the Record Circle as locked and draw a card. So this in essential is a cycle card, but actually is a plus because the card puts itself onto the field, and depending on what turn that is in the game, that can either extend into Alter Ego Messiah when it's unlocked, or if this is on turn 1 and it's your Vanguard unit, you can potentially cheat out Grade 3s or Grade 4s. So that can be really good if you want to be super aggressive. So there are definitely some pros and cons to this card. The only issue is that during the mid to late game, the effectiveness of this card will diminish quite rapidly. So it's more of a high rolly card in my honest opinion. But there is value in the late game, but that's very limited. And because this feels more like a high roll card, I can only give it a 2-star card. And that doesn't mean the card is bad, but in overall valueness, I think it's definitely not on par on the other cards that we've seen, but it's definitely a card that you should weigh the option of if you want to run it, because the high roll aspect of this card can be insane, especially as when we're going to talk about a certain grade 4 that's also in this set. Now, followed up, we've got a couple of grade 2s, and the first one I want to talk about is Counter Kill Strike Gastor. And Gastor has the following ability: Auto on Vanguard the Record Circle. At the end of the battle, it attacked a Vanguard, cost counter +1, and put a card from your hand on the Record Circle as a lock card, and draw a card. So just like the grade 1 that we just talked about, it counter +1 and pluses you because you put a card from a hand onto the field and then you draw a card, so you actually get advantage. But the difference is this is consistent value because you're going to get the skill off because it isn't behind an on-hit effect. So that is making it a lot better, and this combined with the Alter Ego Messiah actually allows you to multi-attack because it's at the end of the battle, so you can attack with it and then call a lock card on top of it, as that is no problem, as it doesn't specify that you need to call a lock card on another Rearguard circle. So that's actually pretty good, and for that I think it's a solid 4-star card. It can be used as a direct plus engine in the mid to late game if you haven't filled out your board, and at the final stages or when you're ready to go off, it can be a direct multi-attack engine in the right circumstances. So pretty good card overall. Then another potential multi-attack engine card is, of course, everybody's favorite female Link Joker waifu, Lady Fencer of the Matter Transmission. And her ability is Auto Rearguard Circle. When it attacks, if you have a Vanguard with Messiah in its card name, so it can be even the old VR Messiah, and of course Premium, this unit gets power plus 5k until the end of the battle. At the end of the battle, lock this unit. So this card is a 15k attacker in a Messiah deck and can lock herself. This is great as it's a good multi-attack engine with the Messiah, Alter Ego Messiah, or even Harmonix Messiah, because they can then immediately unlock it so you can attack again. And 50k attacker is pretty solid, because that means you actually can hit most targets without needing the booster, so you can save the booster for the next attack. Also, because this card locks herself and it doesn't need any other resources, means even if you waste all your Counterblast and Soul and all your other skills, you can still resolve this skill no matter what. And because she locks herself, means you don't have to call units on top of each other or do some intricate plays like we've seen with Gastor that potentially calls on top of itself, so you minus that particular combo piece, which you might or might not want to do. And Lady Fencer doesn't have those minuses to those particular aspects. So it's actually a pretty good card in any aspect of the deck. The only negative point about this card is that it's relatively slow because your Vanguard needs a Messiah, aka you need to be on grade 3. But it doesn't really matter all that much because the grade 3 turns is the turns where you actually start doing stuff. So if you reserve your cards for that turn, doesn't change all that much. And because she is free of everything, is a solid 50k beater, and allows for multi-attack, and again, it's free, allows me to give this card a 5-star rating. It's a really good card. It's free. A free multi-attack. A free 15k power attacker where you have to do absolutely nothing for. It's pretty good. Then before we go back to Alter Ego Messiah, we have one more card that we need to address. And this card is actually quite surprising because nobody saw this card coming, as it's a brand new card and also a type of card we didn't expect that Link Joker would get access to. Because Link Joker got a brand new grade 4 rearguard unit in the likes of Genesis, Machine Deity, Volko-Geet. And Volko, or Volko-Geet, or whatever you want to call this thing, has the following skills. Continuous, you cannot write this card. Well, that's pretty obvious, because if you haven't noticed, this card has a base power of 30k. So yeah, this thing can go fist to fist, toe to toe, or claw to claw with Geese, and I don't know which one I rather want to win, Geese or a Link Joker grade 4 unit. I think both outcomes are as bad. But besides that, this thing also has some rearguard skills, as its first rearguard ability is Auto Rearguard Circle. When placed, retire this unit. So it's one of those restriction skills that doesn't allow you to actually be using it. So it gets retired when called on the Rearguard Circle, and you cannot write it. How are you supposed to use this card? Well, actually pretty easy. It's with all those other cards that allows us to lock cards onto the field. Because placing a card locked into the field isn't the same as placing it by a call skill. And if they unlocked, it's not placed. So it keeps on the board. So you can call this thing with Alter Ego Messiah from Dropstone. You can call it with Harmonix Messiah from the deck. You can call it with the grade 1 on hit ability, and this is where I was talking about the high roll aspect. You can call it then onto the field. You can also call it with Gastor. So there are ways that you can call this thing to the field, and there are a couple of other ways with the older support wave of Messiah or Link Joker in general. So that's the way how you get on the field. So you did all that, you get this bad boy onto the field. What is it that you get rewarded for? Well, that's with the final skill, which is actually the skill of this card, as that is Auto on Rearguard Circle. At the end of the battle, it attacked a Vanguard, cost, lock this unit, and one of your units gets power plus 10k until the end of that turn. So this is basically a grade 4 version of Lady Fencer. But instead of it getting plus 5k, because why should it? Because it's a 30k base, it gives another unit plus 10k. So, and it locks itself. So him and Lady Fencer allows you to multi-attack with Alter Ego Messiah. So that's pretty good. But this card allows you to then empower all those other attacks and even the Vanguard if you need to do that. Because if you have Lady Fencer and this thing onto the field, you attack first with potentially Lady Fencer. It's a 50k attack. Then you attack with this thing 30k and then you lock it. But there's no other rearguard to give 10k power unless you want to give it on the booster. So what can you do? You can give it to the Vanguard. So the Vanguard will swing for 23k base, which is actually pretty solid. And then it unlocks itself, and then you can swing with this thing first to give the Lady Fencer another 10k. So it becomes 25k on its own. But don't forget, it gets another 10k of Alter Ego. So it's actually 35k without a boost implicated. Well, this thing then swings for 40k. Yeah, that's really nuts numbers that you're generating. So this, in my opinion, is in power level way stronger than Lady Fencer. And Lady Fencer was a 5-star card. So you could only guess that this card is definitely a 5-star card. Yeah, you probably were guessing that I was giving it 6-star card. But the reason why this card isn't a 6-star rating card is because of the limitations. Unlike Lady Fencer, this card cannot just be placed from hand onto the field. You need to jump through hoops to actually be able to call this card, because you need to place it with a specific lock skill. So either you need to have it in your hand, or a specific tutor skill that allows you to call it from the deck whenever you want, or from the drop zone with Alter Ego Messiah. And even if you call it within locked, That means you still are dependent on Alter Ego or Harmonix Messiah to then unlock it to be able to call it. The only way to get full power access out of this card is to be able to high roll with the grade 1 and call it in the early game, and your opponent cannot deal with it. Of course, if they don't have control options like a retire, they probably cannot deal with it because they are grade 1, grade 2, even if they're grade 3. How they're supposed to hit a 30k base power, but if they have the control option, they can remove it. So besides that, the only way to actually get direct value out of this the moment that you place locked on field is with a new order card that allows you to directly unlock it once you place it locked onto the field. And that is the reason why that specific grade 3 order card is actually seeing a lot of play, as that's because of this card. That's because of the Harmonix Messiah or the Alter Ego Messiah playstyle that allows you to get more value out of your plays. So yeah, that is the reason why this card isn't a 6-star but a 5-star. On power level wise, what it can do, it's insane. But it's somewhat balanced, and I'm saying the word somewhat balanced in loose terms here, because you need to jump through hoops to actually get this thing onto the board. Now, with all those things explained, let's circle back to our glorious saver himself, Alter Ego Messiah, and let's see how good this card is. Well, we already seen that this card is somewhat on par to Harmonix Messiah, but at the same time is actually better because it's much faster. So that's already a big plus point, and Harmonix Messiah was actually already a pretty good card. But on top of that, the new support around it makes this card insane. It's so easy to just unleash 5 attacks if you can set things up, because you have Lady Fencer as well as Volko Geet, as well as the new grade 2 that allows you to lock cards at the end of the battle. There are definitely easy ways to actually attain 4 to 5 attacks, and with the new order card that facilitates that even more. But on top of that, the amount of power columns you can generate thanks to Lady Fencer and mainly Volko Geet, it's insane, because not only does Alter Ego Messiah give those columns or those units that are being unlocked additional 10k power, but those cards themselves gain or give away even more power. So Messiah, even though it's very piece reliant or has a lot of intricate combos that you need to master and know when to do what, but once you get those things under your belt, this deck is really scary, and Alter Ego Messiah is definitely one of those cards that facilitates those plays, because if this card wasn't there, then probably the deck wouldn't really operate, because Harmonix Messiah doesn't provide the same oomph that Alter Ego does. Because the fact that you can call 2 cards from the drop zone onto the board and you have enough different named key pieces or combo pieces allows you to always have good targets. So yeah, Alter Ego Messiah is definitely a 5-star card for me, because this card is fast, it's consistent, it's powerful, and probably will be played or will be useful even in future eras because of its versatility. So yeah, definitely a good 5-star card in my opinion. And that basically showcased all the interesting new support for Link Joker. The main bulk of the support is definitely split among the Deletor side as well as the Messiah side, which 1 or 2 interesting, or should I say underwhelming generic support cards, because the first couple of cards that we talked about in this video were pretty bad. But on the Deletor side, we've got a couple of interesting cards, but Deletors being Deletors is probably underwhelming, because Bouchero doesn't really want to make the deck as strong, because look at what they did during the Giro. When they actually tried to make that deck strong, it became a ridiculous OTK fest with how fast that deck could kill opponents. So I think they don't want to do that again. And on the other side, we've got Messiah, which is always going to be interesting. Messiah is always known for the multi-tech shenanigans, all those combo plays where you integrate locking, unlocking, do your stuff, then get an advantage by doing this. And I think G-era Link Joker players definitely will not complain with this new playstyle for Link Joker or for Messiahs, because it actually looks pretty fun to play. There are a lot of interesting things you can do and a lot of interesting combos and things you need to learn and master to actually get the full power of this deck under your control. So definitely a nice support way for Link Joker in general. And with that, we basically conclude the last set review for Silverdust Blaze. So I want to know what you guys think of these new cards for Link Joker, for Messiahs and Deletors in the comments down below, because there is a lot of interesting things to have. And I probably overlooked something unique about a specific card, because as I explained, there are a lot of interesting intricate actions going on with this new Messiah Link Joker strategy. And there are probably some older cards that are definitely making these newer cards way better than I explained in this particular video. With that said, I want to thank my Patreon supporters over at patreon.com/VanguardInsider. You guys are amazing. If you do want to support the channel or everything that's happening on the channel, you can simply do that by going down under this video, by hitting the subscribe button as well as the bell button to be updated for future videos. And of course, you can go to patreon.com/VanguardInsider to become a patron today. But with that said, I'm Mr. Time Neep, and I see you guys in the next one.